The Executive Order 13548 was signed on July 26, 2010, and it reaffirmed a previous executive order that President Clinton had signed back a few years before that, which required the federal government to hire 100,000 individuals with disabilities over the 5 years. So the new executive order says we are going to hire 100,000 individuals with disabilities into the federal government in the next 5 years. The new executive order had a lot more teeth to it. It has a lot more teeth to it than the last one did. This specific executive order requires each agency to develop hiring, retention, and training plans to establish goals for individuals with disabilities and sub-goals for individuals with targeted disabilities. It also requires training and emphasis on supervisors and HR professionals. So it didn't just say we're going to hire people with disabilities. It says you have to come up with a plan on how you're going to meet this goal. The good news was that each agency didn't have a target goal. We have to determine what our own goals are. So they didn't cut up the 100,000 and say Air Force has to hire 20,000, Army has to hire 20,000. Each agency was responsible for putting together their own plan with their own specific goals. And it had to be numeric goals, and it has to be yearly goals. On every year, what is our goal and how are we going to meet that goal? The plan also requires agencies to increase the use of Schedule A appointing authority, and we're going to talk more about Schedule A in a minute. It requires them to improve the return to work outcomes and retention of individuals, injured workers, people who are currently receiving workers' compensation benefits. It requires us to ensure accessibility of virtual and physical workspaces. So not only do we have to look at our physical workspaces, is the entrance accessible, do we have accessible parking, we have to look at our virtual workspaces. How many of you take your laptops home and work on computers? How many of you do your work via the internet? That information has to be accessible to individuals with disabilities. And the ability to work on those programs and those projects have to be accessible to people with disabilities. And sometimes that means we have to do things a little differently. I've had conversations with people in charge of providing the training. I've started here with the Air Force in July, had to take the new employee orientation training, which is done over the computer. All right. If I'm a person who is visually impaired and I can't read the screen or I can't see the screen, how am I going to take that training? Because that training is not accessible to individuals with visual impairments. Does that mean we don't hire people with visual impairments? We do, but we have to accommodate them if we're going to do that. So we have to look at not only our job accommodations, but also our training accommodations. The plan also says we have to evaluate our reasonable accommodation procedures and make them stronger, and we have to designate a senior level official responsible for the implementation of this plan. So the plan requires each agency to have accountability as well as transparency. Once the plans were written and submitted back to OPM, those plans then went up on a website. And every year OPM will be asking us to report our progress in meeting our goals, and that information is going to be available to the public. So there's going to be a lot of transparency in how we're going to meet those goals. Next slide, please. So just to recap, the Executive Order 13548 says that the federal government has a goal of hiring additional 100,000 individuals with disabilities over the next 5 years, including individuals with targeted disabilities. Requires mandatory training for supervisors and human resource personnel, so if you fall in any of those categories, welcome to mandatory training. It also requires agency-specific plans and a designated senior level official to implement in each plan. I can see the question in your eyes. What are targeted disabilities? What is she talking about? Well, targeted disabilities, according to EEOC's Management Directive 715, the federal government, as a matter of policy, has identified individuals with targeted disabilities for special emphasis in recruiting and hiring. So we get extra bonus points when we hire individuals with targeted disabilities. Data on the employment of individuals with disabilities, including targeted disabilities, are collected by the EEOC and reported to the President and the Congress every year. So we report to the President and the Congress our rates of individuals with disabilities and targeted disabilities and the progress that we've made over the last several years. Targeted disabilities are usually those most severe disabilities, and people with targeted disabilities have the lowest participation rate in the federal service overall. So the next slide will give you a list of the 9 categories that make up the list of targeted disabilities, and those include deafness, missing extremities, complete paralysis, psychiatric disabilities, distortion of limb or spine, blindness, partial paralysis, convulsive disorders or epilepsy, and intellectual disabilities. The next slide, please. So Air Force has a plan to increase the employment of individuals with disabilities, and we have goals. I spent the best part of the last 3 or 4 months revising Air Force's plan and updating it and to make it to strengthen the plan and to give us more specific goals. So our goal as an agency is to have an 8% participation rate of individuals with disabilities and a 2% total participation rate of individuals with targeted disabilities. And just a reminder that qualified individuals with disabilities may be hired without competition using the Schedule A hiring authority. How are we going to meet that goal? It's by using the Schedule A hiring authority. Why is that important? Well, the next slide will show you. We haven't done a very good job. Air Force, and I'm proud to say, and I can't take a lot of credit because I've only been here a few months, we currently have a 7.3% participation rate of individuals with disabilities. Now our goal is 8%, so I think we're absolutely on track to meet that goal. The problem is the second line. That's the number of individuals with targeted disability. We are currently at 0.6% of participation rate of individuals with targeted disabilities. And as you can see, we've been at 0.6% for the last 3 years. The highest we've been is at 0.8%. We've got a lot of work to do if we're going to reach that 2% goal. And the 2% goal is DOD's goal. It's not just Air Force's goal. It's not just my goal. But that's DOD's goal. So how are we going to do that? We're going to use the Schedule A hiring authority to hire individuals with disabilities. And just as a manager, you have the potential to achieve check marks in 4 executive orders and with 1 hire. If you hire an individual with a disability, you can comply with Executive Order 13548 for the employment of individuals with disabilities. You can comply with Executive Order 13518 for the employment of veterans if you hire a disabled veteran. You can comply with Executive Order 13583 for diversity and inclusion because disability is diversity. And you can also help the Air Force meet its requirements under the hiring reform, which was a presidential memorandum. Just by hiring 1 person, you can achieve those goals in 1 hire.